Hello, I'd like to welcome you to our Internet for All webinar series. My name is Sarah Salgado, and I am a broadband program specialist within the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA. I will be serving as today's moderator. Today, we will discuss the project portion of the Enabling Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure Program application. Mike Thibodeau, a telecommunications policy analyst with the Middle Mile team, will provide an in-depth look at all the parameters that proposed projects must meet. He will cover what you will need to know about project details, technical capabilities, and the required documents to prepare a high-quality application. We will then move into our moderated Q&A session. Mike and I will be joined by Middle Mile Program Director Sarah Blue and our colleague at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. You can submit questions at any time by entering them in the Q&A function on your Zoom module. I will now turn it over to Mike.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Mike Thibodeau. I'm with the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth, and I'm going to be addressing the Middle Mile Grant Program that the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the NTIA, has launched. The Enabling Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure is a $1 billion middle mile infrastructure to reduce the cost of connecting unserved and underserved areas. We will focus today on the application portion of the Middle Mile Grant Program, one of 4 high-speed internet programs administered by the NTA. As described in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the objectives of this program are to encourage the expansion and extension of the middle mile infrastructure to reduce the cost of connecting unserved and underserved areas to the backbone of the internet and promote broadband connection resiliency through the creation of alternate network connection paths designed to prevent single points of failure on a broadband network. When we use the term middle mile, we're referring to basically the midsection of the internet infrastructure. The midsection carries large amounts of data at high speeds over long distances, bridging the backbone of the internet to the last mile, which connects end users. So if we think of that in a transportation methodology, we're not talking about the freeways and we're not talking about community roads, but we're talking about the highways that bridge these categories. Second, the program is open to many eligible entities, including, but not limited to, government entities, utility companies, and nonprofits that provide internet services, or partnerships, and let me emphasize partnerships, of 2 or more of these groups. And third, eligible entities can use grant funds in a variety of ways that contribute to middle mile expansion, including the construction or improvement or acquisition of facilities and equipment, the engineering design, including permitting of work-related projects, and also the personnel costs, which include salaries and benefits. And there may be some other miscellaneous costs necessary to complete the program's activities as well. So our focus today is on the project information portion of the Middle Mile Grant Program application. I encourage applicants to review previous webinars on applicant information and mark your calendar for the upcoming webinar in August on the budget information. NTIA is only going to be accepting applications via the online application portal. This is a change from the past. And the applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on September 30th. And that portal is located at grants.ntia.gov. Again, grants.ntia.gov. And to borrow a little bit from English history, for any of you Guy Fawkes fans, if you'd like a little mnemonic rhyme for that, I encourage you to remember the end of September, because the portal is merciless. Unlike me, the portal will shut down at 11:59 p.m. on that date, and no other applications are going to be accepted. If you do have questions, or if you're having trouble accessing the portal, please contact our team well in advance of September 30th. Given that we're now in the middle of July, we have about 2.5 months to get everything together, completed, and submitted. Awards will be announced no earlier than March 1st of 2023, so that's March 1st of next year, with funds available on or about this time next year. And on the right-hand side, you will see we've included a few reminders regarding formatting requirements for the application materials. Please be aware of those. I guess the biggest thing is remembering font size, and do not use legal size electronic paper. Preparing the application materials in this way will ensure that your application can be processed through the portal and avoid delays. Okay, so there are 3 major sections in the project information for the middle mile program application. There's the project details, the technical capabilities, and the required documents. We'll go through these in order. And again, all information needs to be entered online through the application website. And for this portion of the application, you will start by clicking the Get Started button next to Project Details. For right now, I recommend just listening and taking some notes and not trying to follow along within the portal. But after this, please be sure to go into the portal, make sure that you are registered, and make sure that you can fill out all of the necessary information. And now we'll begin with project details. So just a couple of notes to begin to familiarize everybody with how the application guidance is going to be shared. All of the components that we discussed today are flagged on the slide with small gray icons, such as what you can see at the bottom of the page. We have a small cloud, we have a small arrow, and we also have a document. These icons are going to repeat throughout the presentation and are intended to indicate what type of input is required. The arrow is used for material entered directly into the grants portal. Most of the time, this is going to be a narrative, some type of paragraph or paragraphs form. You can also include in that any of the yes, no, or multiple choice drop-down questions. Those are going to be the material entered directly. A cloud is going to be used to indicate items or files that applicants must upload. And with regard to those files, again, refer back to the formatting instructions there. Although you are entering that into the grants portal, those will need to be prepared offline. And then the page icon is for any fillable form that an applicant will complete on the portal. So you will see forms that have been deconstructed, and you will enter that information directly into the portal. And then the last item to highlight is related to the narrative sections. For the narrative sections, for those paragraph or paragraphs that are going to be directly input, please note that there are character limits. And you will see the character limits like you see at the top here on the executive summary. These are characters, not words. And the system, again, I said, is merciless. It will cut you off at that character count. If you are in the middle of a sentence or the middle of a word, you will not be able to complete that. So we do recommend constructing those offline first and then being able to paste in. It will give you not only a chance to edit, but it will also give you a record of processing activity that you have as well. One other thing to note as far as the narrative fields go is that you can expand the fields. You will see a couple of hash marks in the corner of those narrative fields that you can expand, so you can see more than 3, 4, or 5 lines at a time. So please take that into account when you're drafting your responses. Now, on with the actual application itself. First project details section is the executive summary. And this should just be a clear and compelling narrative summary of the project. It should be high level, it should be comprehensive and thorough, and the reviewers should be able to immediately have a clear understanding of the project purpose. Things like, how is the project advancing the middle mile grant program objectives as specified in the notice of funding opportunity? Where the location the project is going to take place, and what is the level of need in the proposed service areas, remembering that we're stressing for the unserved and underserved. We want you to be specific, including information regarding the rurality, socioeconomic indicators in that area, but also not to, again, it's a summary, so do not include everything there. However, that being said, please make sure that there is no new information introduced. If there is something in the executive summary and it is not addressed in the rest of the application, the reviewers are going to wonder why it was said. So make sure that if there is something in the executive summary, that there are further details further down in the application. We also would like you to touch on the binding commitments that are made to this program, and you will see the actual binding commitments themselves further in the application, but that is choosing to service unserved areas, connecting non-contiguous trust lands, and offering carrier-neutral broadband at economical rates. None of this should be highly technical unless it is integral to understanding the proposal. And it should also include relationships to organization and partners or other partnerships. It should also address, at least in some form, budget, providing high-level financial figures and the expected matching contribution. A couple of things to note regarding the executive summary. Consider this information public, or at least potentially public. It could be used in a press release if the application is funded. So all information here, be prepared that someone else could see it. So if you have a secret sauce that you don't want to disclose, if you have proprietary information, it does not belong here. Also make sure that it's ready to go, because I don't know what the editing will be like. We do want to make sure that the executive summary is consistent with the information echoed throughout the application. If you are talking about widgets in the executive summary, and then you are talking about flugel binders in the details, we're going to wonder what exactly is going on. So again, please proofread and make sure that everything is consistent. Although the executive summary is first in line, we implore you to actually write it last, so that you can make sure that everything that you've constructed thus far can be summarily placed in that executive summary. As far as the level of need, applicants should provide the most complete picture possible of the existing state of broadband infrastructure in the proposed areas, such as why is the infrastructure insufficient to meet the demands of the communities, and why is the proposed network the most efficient means to address these needs. We need you to discuss the degree of your network and cover the competitive landscape to the degree that you can, and other pertinent details about broadband in the area. Are there variations? If there is service in the area, why isn't it meeting the community needs? There is an opportunity to discuss the proportion of the area that qualifies as unserved and underserved, and the general economic conditions. Also, please note, what is the value add of the project? And value does not equate to worth. So what kind of value are we bringing to the community? Are we bringing to the greater area? What is the projected number of expected users? What is the basis for that figure? Are there other service providers, last mile, who have expressed interest in utilizing the network? We fully expect that the projects will be built in collaboration and consultation with others. So also confirm that your proposal is consistent with your state's broadband plan priorities. If your state does not have a broadband plan, please make sure that you're consulting with community and other partners as well. And I'll dive into that a little bit later in the presentation. This is a section where you can provide more detail, again, within that character limit. That's great. The goal is to get a comprehensive picture of the broadband ecosystem that exists in the proposed service area, and a clear understanding of how the application is going to improve it. This could include climate resilience, supporting community anchor institutions, and so on. There are a myriad of ways that it could be written. So be creative, and if you have bold ideas, this is where we would like to see them. So as I mentioned, as far as government and community involvement, we believe that this is going to be very integral to the success, making sure that we have as many stakeholders in place as we can. And again, going back to the partnerships that I mentioned before. If you've seen me present on some of the networking activities prior, the term that I like to use is know your customer or know your data, know your constituent, whatever mantra you use, but but again, understanding the areas that you're going to be serving and trying to work together to make this the best application possible. We do want to make sure that we do not have duplicative applications. We also want to make sure that the different varying priorities of the community are fully understood and can be best weighed and balanced. The narrative input is meant for the applicant to describe their coordination with their state, territory, tribal, and local governments, being aware of other projects that could have potential impact to this service area. What are the stakeholders buy-in, if any, and their level of involvement? We definitely want to identify organizations to participate in the project, whether it be community, public, nonprofit, and private sectors. We can try to outline their roles and clarifying the potential benefits for the community that will receive from the project, such as purely as an example, free or discounted access to say dark fiber. And then of course, the approach that you've used in trying to gauge the local community within the project. If you do have letters of support or other documentation showing how the application and the program has been put together, feel free to note them here. Also, please note, if your organization is neither a state nor a territory, the NTIA strongly encourages you to consult with the state broadband office for consistency with planning with the state. We also recognize that there may not, in some instances, be a state broadband office. So as far as other project details, the binding commitment and statutory purpose. This spans about 8 questions, some of which are yes, no, and one of which allows for some extra narrative. We're requiring you actually to confirm that you will make a binding commitment to prioritize at least one of the following 3 priorities according to President Biden's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This is a congressional requirement. Applicants that do not make a commitment to one of these programs will not pass initial review. So the 3 prioritizations: connecting middle mile infrastructure to last mile networks that provide or plan to provide broadband service to households in unserved areas, connecting non-contiguous trust lands in the instance you can describe in your further narrative, or offering wholesale broadband service at reasonable rates on a carrier-neutral basis. While questions 1 to 3 concern what is being prioritized in the application and is what is statutorily required, questions 4 to 8 form a new set of statutory requirements where meeting at least 2 of the 5 will result in the application receiving a greater priority, providing that you scored 80% in review. I'll repeat that. Meeting at least 2 of the 5 will you receive a greater priority. If the entity can cover more than 2, do so. NTIA encourages you to address as many of these items as possible, although I will also say, getting back to the know your customer, also know thyself. Don't overextend. Do what you can do and do it well. Question 4 concerns adopting fiscally sustainable middle mile strategies. Emphasis on the sustainable. NTIA and the administration fully expects these networks to go at least 20 years, if not longer. So sustainable is going to be another key part of this. Question 5 commits to offering non-discriminatory interconnect to terrestrial and wireless last mile service providers. This should also be described in your interconnect policy response. And question 6 identifies specific terrestrial and wireless last mile providers that have expressed interest in interconnecting with middle mile infrastructure. Please pay close attention to where justification for statutory purpose selections should be documented separately in the application, especially regarding the budget narrative or financial documentation is uploaded in addition. And again, the more on the financial portion will be in the webinar in August. Question 7 concerns project acceleration. So if you can identify supplemental investments or say in-kind support, such as waived franchise or permitting fees that would accelerate the completion of the planned project, you can describe this in the project timeline narrative. Question 8 is whether you demonstrated that the middle mile infrastructure will benefit national security interests of the United States. That's a rather broad category, but again, we want to note meeting 2 of the 5 criteria, meaning after the initial review, your application will be prioritized. 2 is a minimum, not a maximum. Please pay particular attention to where additional justification and documentation is provided to support the commitments throughout the entire application. So I said that the national security could be a bit broad. So when completing this application, please include content on whether the proposed middle mile infrastructure could increase redundancy and resiliency of telecommunications that support broadband services and other telecommunication services, protection of critical national infrastructure, again, that's a rather broad topic, border security, or other physical infrastructure, including sensors and monitoring. For the project timeline, applicants must provide an infrastructure build out to include milestones for implementation. There's going to be several questions. Question 1, please specify the number of years of the project from 1 to 5 using whole numbers. Question 2, you're going to be asked to enter the project timeline narrative. The narrative must describe key milestones for implementation and preparation and relevant risk factors. Please remember risk and risk mitigation. The narrative should also include a capital investment schedule confirming you will both complete the project and have initiated service within 5 years of receipt of grant funds and also meet the interim build requirements, which I'll go over shortly. If the project can be accelerated with supplemental investments or in-kind support, please explain that here as well. And then finally, we're going to need details on completion objectives. This could include network design, securing relevant licenses or other agreements, site prep if necessary, both inside and outside plants, deployment of business and operational systems, because again, we must have this operational, and of course, never, ever forget testing. Also within the timeline, we're asking for key milestones, project implementation. This could include field surveys, network designs, procurement of equipment, any environmental assessments that need to be done, various aspects of construction, and then of course, network testing and activation. We're asking that only files such as PDF, Excel, or PowerPoint be used. So again, 3 different types: PDF, Excel, or PowerPoint. Other types of files such as Project or Primavera, as much as I'm dying to make an Italian food joke on Primavera, I'm not going to do that. But we do have file transfer and formatting issues that make it hard for the reviewers. So again, stick to the 3: PDF, Excel, PowerPoint. As far as the interim build out, it is expected 40% of the project miles are completed by the end of the 2nd year, 60% by the end of the 3rd year, 80% by the end of the 4th year, and 100% by the end of the 5th year. And please remember, it is expected operations no later than 5 years after the date of the award. Tribal certifications and waivers. The next 4 slides reference sections Roman numeral 3G through Roman numeral 3L of the Middle Mile Grant Program NOFO, please go and review those sections after this webinar to familiarize yourself with the requirements, as this is just an overview. Special rules do exist for tribal governments and Native entities. If the applicant is a tribal government or Native entity, most directives related to the Middle Mile Grant Program can be waived or modified at the discretion of the Assistant Secretary. Modification requests must be uploaded. Each request should specify its necessity for the delivery or administration of grants or the construction, improvement, or acquisition related to the grants. Tribal governments can also self-certify whether an area on its own tribal land is unserved or underserved based upon the criteria of its choosing. To do so, tribal governments must provide a statement on tribal letterhead that defines the area being certified, explains how that determination was made, and provides any supporting information. Now, as far as program details, in questions 1 and 2, we're asking you to certify and demonstrate compliance with federal labor and employment laws. The best way that I can say this is obey the law, and that pretty much covers it. A couple of other details: applicants must have demonstrated a record of and plans to be in compliance with federal labor and employment laws. Question 1 is going to ask for a narrative statement that demonstrates the compliance, and this narrative must provide how applicants are going to incorporate strong labor standards, how you're going to ensure work provides quality jobs as defined by the Economic Development Administration's Good Jobs Challenge, description of any prior legal determination by any court or adjudicator that the applicant has failed to satisfy governing wage or labor mandates, and a description of how the applicant expects to rely on subcontracting arrangements in completing the project. In question 2, we're asking for the upload of a certification from a director level employee or organizational officer that affirms compliance with fair labor and employment laws. And if you're asking for which director level employee, I would say director level or higher, such as chief, that has responsibility for HR or similar related function. The director of, say, engineering would not really comply with the intent of the question here. This helps demonstrate that you are being consistent, not only with past compliance as well as future. In questions 3 and 4, please provide narrative statements about workforce impacts and commitments. Question 3, we're asking for a plan that ensures the project workforce will be appropriately skilled and credentialed. The requirements for the plan are highly detailed. Please go to the NOFO section, Roman numeral 3, and read that very closely. In question 4, please enter another narrative and examples of how the project will provide appropriate investments in a diverse and well-trained workforce. This could include, but is certainly not limited to, describing your outreach and the recruitment of populations traditionally underrepresented in broadband and IT jobs. This could include women, persons of color, persons with disabilities, and for whom English is a second language. Describing how you will abide by the requirements set out in 2 CFR Part 200.321, requiring non-federal recipients of federal grants to take all necessary affirmative steps to ensure that minority businesses, women's businesses, and labor surplus area firms are used when possible, and describing implementation strategies, ensuring the populations facing barriers to participation. This could include persons with disabilities, disconnected youth, individuals with past criminal records, say justice impacted and reentry participants, etc. Also those in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, aka SNAP, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, Women, Infants and Children, or WIC, etc., etc. Also to include veterans and military spouses. In questions 5 and 6, applicants must provide information on the project's plan regarding climate resiliency, as well as to a binding non-discrimination agreement. Question 5, please demonstrate in 3,000 characters or less how you've sufficiently accounted for current and future weather and climate related risks, especially for new infrastructure, and how you're going to address these risks, whether you're hardening something or alternative siting, noting the regional risks for that area. Also potentially improving the speed of restoration, the mean time to repair, as it were. Please conduct at a minimum that we have the following activities outlined: identifying the geographic areas subject to initial hazard screenings for future weather and climate risks, identifying whether these hazards may be most important to account and respond to, characterizing any risks to new middle mile structure, again following that 20 years following deployment, and detail of the applicant's plans for periodically repeating this process, establishing some sort of cadence over the life of the project to be aware of and understand that these risks will evolve. And in question 6, again, we're going for the binding commitments to abide by the non-discrimination requirements that are included but not limited to a couple of the acts that I'm going to name here. But again, please go back to the NOFO. But it would be Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Educational Amendment of 1972, Americans with Disability Act, ADA of 1990, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Age Discrimination Act, Title VII of the Civil Rights, and any other non-discrimination laws. So we'll move into technical capabilities. So as far as technical capabilities, question 1 requires you to provide a certification attesting that you're technically qualified to implement the proposed project. Much like the certification from before, if this is from an officer or director of the company, not a third-party certificate. This upload should be very much like the other, restricted to one of the three file types: PDF, Excel, or PowerPoint. And then questions 2 through 4 are going to require some narratives. For question 2, along with the description, each applicant must certify that the proposed project, upon completion, will be capable of supporting retail broadband service as directed by the bipartisan infrastructure law. So again, capable of supporting retail broadband service. We're also going to need a competitive landscape narrative that should describe the existing middle mile offerings in the proposed project area. This could include competitor data, if applicable. It should also include a description of the proposed service offerings, including pricing and technology of the services to be offered. And then please again notice the upload files section underneath that narrative text field. You're encouraged to upload any supplemental documentation to support the narrative. And there is also an interconnect policy. This should describe the non-discrimination, interconnection, and network management practices that will be adopted. This should show how you intend to comply with connectivity to the public internet and physical interconnection for the exchange of traffic. It should also disclose any practices to block access to illegal or harmful content. Please note that these non-discrimination and interconnection requirements only apply to components funded by the Middle Mile Grant Program. There may be negotiated later some contractual covenants with broadband providers, depending upon what these conditions are to pass through them, but ultimately is the grantee who must have the safeguards in place to ensure that non-discrimination and interconnection obligations are met. Also within technical capabilities, question 1 is going to ask you about the type of technology. If fiber optic is chosen solely, a mandatory field is going to be then displayed in which you are going to have to certify again that the proposed project will include direct interconnection facilities that will facilitate the provision of the broadband service at speeds not less than 1 gigabit per second, both upload and download symmetric, for connection to anchor institutions, community anchor institutions that are located within 1,000 feet of the middle mile infrastructure. Also, if fiber is chosen, the applicant must upload the community anchor institution template. This template is provided in the program package that is requesting the names and addresses of the facilities that are within that 1,000 feet of the proposed area. If wireless or other is chosen, the certification statement and use of the CII template are optional, but they are encouraged. It is possible to request a waiver if the applicant can demonstrate that one of the requirements mentioned is not technically or economically feasible. If the waiver is requested, you will be required to attach a waiver application in the required documents section under additional waiver upload. For question 3 in the technology section, applicants are required to provide a physical network map. This is going to include project areas, especially highlighting unserved and underserved areas, pre-existing service areas with current service levels, the physical path of the network's transmission medium, interconnect points that are purely passive for non-environmentally controlled nodes, wireless towers, and then again, the community anchor institutions within 1,000 feet. The maps should delineate between the primary applicants and or key partners' existing network or networks, the new proposed network for this project, and then also anything leased from a third party, and anything that is also utilized under some alternative agreement or arrangement. And that's, again, relative to the interconnect with either the last mile or another middle mile service provider. For the maps, please note, only and only Esri shapefiles are going to be accepted. So again, Esri shapefiles only, .shp, .shx, and .dbf extensions. As far as the data submission template, please use and adhere to all the templates provided by the NTIA. If a document with an associated NTI template is not submitted in the template format, applicants are going to be asked to resubmit, and it's going to delay review. So please, please, please use the templates as provided. In the data submission portion, please complete the provided table with the information for all interconnection points for the network. All 3 fields are going to be required. That is going to be the point name, and it's going coupled with the latitude and the longitude. This should accommodate information for interconnection points for network access, points to last mile service providers, peering points, as well as towers. Also within the technical capabilities section is going to be the network logical diagram to include all the network elements, the capacity, facilities, and approximate mileage between each element. We are requiring that diagrams clearly indicate existing network elements, explicitly showing links between the nodes, internet access peering points, proposed aggregation node facilities providing egress, points of interconnect as well as colo, and for wireless systems, the antenna height as well as the proposed frequencies. When developing the network diagram, please keep in mind to indicate the points of interconnect for third-party service providers and the internet peering points. Again, showing the distance, preferably in miles, between points, whether you're using existing ducts, poles, or whether it's overlay or new build, and in-ground buried versus aerial. Indicate basic equipment types and capacity figures at the aggregation nodes. The diagrams should include capacity constraints for each network element, while also showing which technologies and standards are used at the junctions of the network. The final narrative of this section is going to be the environmental narrative. It should be emphasized that any activity that may negatively affect the environment must not be undertaken prior to the completion of the NTIA environmental review process. If not, it could eliminate the application from consideration altogether. Please note the proposed projects must comply with applicable environmental regulations, such as the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, as well as the Endangered Species Act. This must provide a complete description, physical description of the project activities, inclusive of the location, duration, and what equipment is used. The physical project area and its surroundings must also be described in detail. Any of the activities described for the effects on the surrounding environment should be clear. For example, don't just say replace an existing utility pole. Address questions like what equipment will be needed to install the replacement, if equipment is needed to take out the existing replacement, will removal cause ground disturbance, etc. So more detail here is better. Please note also there is a space to upload map images for site photographs and aerial photography. The last section is going to be the required documents, again, asking for uploads. The first required document applicants must upload is the organization's negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, or NICRA, if applicable. NICRA is a document published to reflect an estimate of the indirect cost rate negotiated between the federal government and a grantee's organization. If indirect costs, such as facilities or other administrative costs, are included in the budget, the applicant must upload a copy of the approved NICRA. If indirect rates were not established, applicants must state why that is. NICRA, without a NICRA, you can elect to charge indirect costs of de minimis, or 10% of the indirect cost rate. And please note that this election is part of the budget portion of the application. The second required document indicated here is the table of funded participants and unfunded collaborators. This is input directly into the portal, but a template has been provided in the Middle Mile application package. And you're encouraged to complete this form as a draft prior to inputting the form contents into the portal. Again, also to have as your records, but to make sure everything equals out. Just as a note, there are a couple of different delineations, I guess, in roles that to be pointed. We do ask for you to specify the role and scope of each project participant as a partner, subrecipient, match provider, or other major contractor. To delineate between the two, a subrecipient is a party that performs work to accomplish a public purpose or a grant of a grant project. Laws, regulations, and programmatic requirements that apply to a grant recipient also flow down to the subrecipient. A contractor is a party that provides goods and services in normal business operation in a competitive environment. Just a note between those two. And the last required document is going to be a certificate of operational capability. Each applicant must supply a certification from an officer level employee or equivalent within the organization. Officer level employee is defined as someone who has the authority to make commitments on behalf of the organization. The certification is merely attesting that the applicant's operational capability is sufficient to both complete and operate the project. If applicable, applicants must also certify they have operated middle mile networks previously for at least 2 years, or that there is a solely owned by a subsidiary of such an entity that has operated a similar network. So if you've been owned by such an entity, you can then specify the number of years the parent company has been operating. The certification must attest that FCC Form 477 and the Broadband Data Act has been submitted by an officer level employee if the applicant has provided previously or is currently providing voice and or broadband services. Additionally, there's going to be a requirement for qualified operating and financial report submitted if the applicant has exclusively operated an electric transmission or distribution service. These reports must indicate that they've been filed with a relevant financial institution for the appropriate timeframes. And just some common mistakes that are made, or as I like to say, mistooks. Things to be aware of and keep in the back of your head, and again, have the checklist if you need. So please pay very close attention to the application requirements to avoid delays in review. Some things that we've seen in the past, especially with regard to missing or incomplete forms. Documents uploaded in the incorrect file type, as I mentioned before, the 3 different file types, or not using a template. Inconsistent or inaccurate information across the narratives. Again, widgets versus Flugel binders, make sure that we have that consistency there. Incorrectly selecting yes/no options. In this application, yes means yes and no means no, and neither the two shall meet. Password protected documents that cannot be opened. Well, that's great for your security. That means that we can't read them. And if we can't read them, we're not going to be able to help you. Images and text and uploaded documents that are blurry and cannot be clearly read. Again, please proof everything. Make sure that that everything is clear and as concise and readily formatted. Do you want to make sure that all of your required forms, templates, and documents have been uploaded, including the network diagram, the network route map, again in the Esri shapefile only, the data submission template, the NICRA, table of funded and unfunded, the certification of operational and technical capabilities, as well as other technical capability documents as needed or as you see fit, as well as the tribal waivers and certifications as applicable. Lastly, please ensure that the project name and budget information are consistent across the forms. Although we know that $117.71 is very close to $118. If we see $118 and $117.71, we're going to assume that something is wrong or was not calculated, and we will consider those to be different. And while we do creative project names, please make sure that the project names have some type of standard so that we know that it is for your particular application for a particular project, and so that we don't have issues with version control. So along with some of the mistakes and irksome items, I'll also offer some best practices to consider. Please thoroughly read the NOFO, as I've mentioned before, for a much better and comprehensive understanding, because a lot of the items here today have been abridged. It provides a good overview, but the details you will find in the NOFO. Communicate, and connect and collaborate with your broadband offices. I will also add with your partners and peers, referencing back the partnerships that we spoke about before. When doing the narratives online in the portal, please begin them as drafts before saving them into the portal, both for your record keeping purposes, but also making sure that you're hitting the formats and the specificity that you would like. And again, copy and paste the narratives from the separately saved documents. Always use the templates from the NTIA when they are provided. It will keep the review process much more efficient and fast. Also, you will have to, through the portal, confirm that all required forms are properly completed, and there will be an attestation from the authorized representative as such. Please ensure that the summary information is consistent across all forms. As I had mentioned before, with the version control, although I understand that Mike and Michael are probably me, or at least referring to the same person, when we do see inconsistencies, we can't always tell, and that does slow us down and cause confusion. And of course, as I mentioned before as well, write the executive summary last after all the detailed information is in, and assume that that executive summary could be revealed to the general public in the case of an award, and that there should be no proprietary information, secret sauce, or other things that you would not want anyone else to see. And then again, document that the eligible entity, you, the applicant, are meeting at least 2 or more of the statutory requirements as designated in questions 4 through 8, so that the application is prioritized in programmatic review. Additional resources for you. If you have not already, please go to internetforall.gov. There's a lot of information there. Again, engage with the state or territory regarding the government's plans to improve high-speed internet access. Submit other questions to middlemile@nta.gov. We will make sure that we are updating the FAQs, and the more frequently the same questions get asked, the better that we can provide the information to you. And again, please make sure to attend future NTIA webinars, including program-specific application guidance. Thank you all today for joining us and listening on the applicant information portion of the Middle Mile program. You can see several different contact points there if you have any other items that need to be follow-up that are not within the general context of the Middle Mile. And we can now move on to questions.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Mike, for that presentation. We will now move into our Q&A portion. So in addition to Mike, I would like to welcome Ming Q. Ming is a grants officer joining us today from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, our colleague at NIST. Ming is going to partner today with our wonderful Middle Mile director, Sarah Blue, to answer your questions. Webinar participants, we would like to ask that you continue to enter your questions into the Q&A function. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom, there's a Q&A function to submit your questions and not in the chat. We don't want to miss them, so please put them in the Q&A. So we'll try to go through and answer as many questions as we can. If there's anything we are unable to answer, we will integrate them into future webinars. We encourage you to check our website resources. We published our second round of frequently asked questions last week. And lastly, you may also continue to send questions to middlemile@ntia.gov. So Mike, Sarah, and Ming, the floor is now open for questions. So here we go. Let's get the first one started. So we have a lot of questions regarding the Middle Mile grant portal characteristics. A question we had is that do spaces count in the character count for the text boxes in the portal?
Do you want me to take that, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So the very simple answer is yes. Characters are characters, spaces are characters, and punctuation are characters. So yes, everything counts.
All right. Another characteristic component is that, viewers are wondering if there were size restrictions to the sections that require uploads.
As far as character count, no, we're not counting characters and we're not counting words. The files themselves do not necessarily have a size limitation. I guess I would just say if you're uploading petabytes, you probably made the file a little bit too large, but otherwise, no, we should be able to accommodate large file uploads.
All right. Another question we received more specifically, must the network logical diagrams conform to the 8.5 by 11 page format?
You know what, Sarah, thank you to the person who asked that. I wondered if you could follow up in the chat or the Q&A. What I personally, and Mike, chime in here if I'm misunderstanding this. I'm wondering, like I'm envisioning somebody putting together like a PowerPoint or a Visio or something like that for the logical drawing. So unless you're just planning on taking like digitizing a big giant C, D, or E sized piece of paper, if you can just confirm on that question. Mike, do you have anything to add on that?
No, actually, I do think that's a good clarification, because I could see that happening. Although I would say we definitely would not be printing anything that large. We may need to have follow-up as far as where to focus on anything that large.
All right, thank you. So when we go back to the application and we think about the number of collaborators to include in the application, we have a question here. The Department of Transportation is demanding 24 fiber and 2 spare microducts in exchange for right-of-way use, causing us to increase the fiber count for the project. Should the DOT be listed as an unfunded collaborator?
I think I can take that question. Thank you for whoever asked the question. The answer is, if there's a requirement being placed that it would be a stakeholder or collaborator, then we would recommend you to list the collaborate into the collaborate table. Mike mentioned in the presentation as well, and also in section 4 of the NOFO contest application forms, requires that applicant to provide a table of funded partners and also unfunded collaborators. So you should list all the funded and unfunded project collaborators, including partners, subrecipients, match providers, any major contractors or suppliers that, and also detail the scope of the work for the project. There is a template, a fillable template for the funded, unfunded collaborators on our NTIA website, and also within the program checklist and package. So you should use a template to fill out all the funded and unfunded collaborators, which is part of the required document to submit as the application.
All right, thank you, Ming. Switching gears a little bit, in coordination with state broadband offices. So we have a question here. Do tribal governments have the state consultation requirement?
You know what? I don't know that it's necessarily a requirement. I do think it's a good idea to talk. And I'm sorry if that sounds kind of soft and evasive, but I think it's a good idea to talk. Mike, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think coordination and consistency of any kind is good. It's a lot of money, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be a lot of money. So we want to make sure that it's spent well and that we're good stewards. And the more coordination that there is, then hopefully the better we can make this program overall.
And building off of that question, Sarah, would you be able to tell us if there is a best way or approach to approach the applications that will align with the state?
I would, a couple of things. If you go to our Broadband USA website, we've got under state resources, the State Broadband Leaders Network, and we have contacts for each state. So I would definitely take a look there and reach out to the state where your project is being proposed. Get in touch with that state broadband office and let them know what it is you're doing. We're also I was going to say that we are going to have federal program officers in most states for the BEAD program, but I don't know that lineup will be announced for a little bit. So I don't want to delay anybody. What I would definitely start with right now, because it's available, is take a look at that State Broadband Leaders Network. And thank you, Ryan. Ryan just posted that link in the chat. Take a look at those contacts. Also, I did see, thank you, John, for responding to the question on the file size, or excuse me, on the 8.5 by 11 for the logical diagram as well as mapping. And I think that we tried pretty hard to break the portal when we were testing it and building it. And it's pretty robust. It should take any file size type. So I think load it up. Mike, do you have anything to add there on ESRIs or the Visios that might be just like not petabytes, but multiple megabytes?
Yeah, I was just reading. No, I don't think so. I think if we're still in the gigabyte range, I don't think there's going to be an issue. Like I said, if we're going into peta or zeta, or things like that, then let's chat. But otherwise, at least from the mapping perspective, high level is fine. And if there's detail call outs, but we're not looking for like a 1 meter by 1 meter resolution, or anything like that.
Thank you, Sarah and Mike. We will now jump into our next question. This is a two-part question. And the viewer asks, what specific evidence does NTIA require from applicants to demonstrate that last mile deployment will result from the middle mile project when built? More specifically, they asked, does NTIA want MOUs?
We don't want to build a bridge to nowhere. We want to make sure that this middle mile is being proposed in areas where, there's a lot of questions about when the FCC, how do we know unserved and underserved? We can get to some of those questions later on. And I also think that there's some questions about unserved and underserved coming up in the FAQs. Sorry, I just had a great big huge brain fart. Can you repeat that question for a second, Sarah, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So what specific evidence does NTIA require from applicants to demonstrate that last mile deployment will result from the middle mile project when built?
Okay, thank you. I know what I was going to say. Because this project, this program is not funding last mile at all. We understand that you're not actually connecting to last mile. You're going to build this bridge, and we're looking for any conversation that you've done your homework. You've identified where those unserved, underserved places, areas are located, where there's a need for middle mile backbone that might be resilient to existing backbone, and that you're talking to these last mile providers who can serve these unserved and underserved communities. So roll up your sleeves and I personally wanted to see letters of commitment, and that's not what we're asking for. But MOUs, letters of intent, just as much evidence that you have of those relationships have begun, that there is a desire to work with you. That's the kind of information that we're looking for. And it's really important. That should go to your level of need and understand, and to the point earlier about talking to everybody, making there, I keep saying over and over, there's not going to be one big fat hero in this middle mile program. It's really going to be a variety of us coming together to build this middle mile backbone that our country needs.
Sarah, could I add something there as well?
Of course.
Yeah, so I would also say, so if you're in a consortium today or a partnership today, or even if you provide, like say you're providing both last mile and middle mile, if you have memorandums of understanding or other contract vehicles that are already in place today, tell us about that. Say they are existing, say when they started, when they're going to end, we're in, renegotiation, what have you. And if there are, also consider, this is a little bit of a liberal interpretation, right? But from the competitive landscape, also look at it as the cooperative landscape. So, hey, as Sarah said, we're building this bridge. And by the way, on the other side of this bridge are these entities that we are either talking to or they've contacted us. Again, this is very much, this is going to be, whether you call it partnership, whether you call it cooperative, it's going to be a network. It's not going to be one entity. It's going to be entities.
And I can't help it. Mike, now every time I see your face, I'm going to want you to sing September.
You're welcome. Sorry about that.
Sorry for that.
All right, switching gears a little bit. Mike, I know in the presentation, you discussed a little bit about the program timelines. So I was wondering if you'd be able to restate the milestones.
The milestones for the application or the milestones for the project itself, for the?
The project
Oh.
timeline.
Okay, so the very nutshell version is it's a 5-year time span from date of award. So let's just call that about 1 year from today, give or take. So within that 5 years, the network must be designed, lit, tested, and operational, with the interim milestones being at the 40% mark for 2 years in, 60% mark for 3 years in, 80% for 4 years in, and then 100% at the end.
And so when we think about timelines, we have a question here. Being that there may be a significant permitting phase that will most likely take 2 years, and the network miles will then be completed in year 3, would this make the project ineligible?
That would not make it ineligible, but it is definitely, that's the kind of thinking that we need to, I'm happy to hear that question, because sometimes permitting, NEPA, all of that takes a really long time, and we need these projects to be built. The money's going out the door so that we can have the middle mile in place in about 5 years.
Great. I see we also have a question here related to fiscally sustainable and the project's viability for 20 years. Are we allowed to extend the NTIA project financial pro forma out to 20 years from the current 8-year scale?
I think that's a great question. Number one, I want to make sure everybody knows, use the pro formas that we're putting, use the templates that we're providing in this application zip file that's on our website, Internet for All. If you need to, understanding that it might take 5 years to build the project, and that it might take a few more years to get to cash flow positive, and you want to show us when you're going to be cash flow positive, we will accept additional years added to the pro forma, but use the template that we have provided, please.
And so in relation to templates, we have a viewer that is curious to know if NTIA has a template for the Esri shape files.
We do not, I'm sorry to say. The reason that we're requesting Esri is because we anticipate that there will be many applications, and we're trying to take all of this data to put it into our own mapping system, which is Esri based, so that we can understand where all of these applications are located. So I do not have a template for you, but maybe we can, if there's anybody who needs, that was one of the questions that I had when we started working on this project. My own familiarity with mapping was largely using KMZs, and then I was told that I was a dinosaur. So if there's somebody who's having difficulty converting their KMZs into Esri or shapefiles, please let us know. We do need to have the shapefile format, but if that's a problem for you, please let us know that. Mike, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of offer the same, but we can check with I'm not the best mapper anymore, but we can check to see what can be done for conversions, because that kind of gets back to what I had stated before, like on the clarity level. What we don't want to have is we don't want to have you converting and having something get pixelated or or lost in translation.
Right.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Sarah and Mike. We have a question here. For a company that is already an established middle mile provider, does this disadvantage them in the chances of obtaining a grant?
I am not sure why that would, why anybody would be disadvantaged. We're looking for eligible entities, and an existing provider is certainly eligible, and then complete the application 100%, use our templates, show, look at the way that covers the initial eligibility question. Take a look at how we're reviewing how you are going to be evaluated in the merit, and how you will obtain points there. Talking about the level of need, talking about project sustainability, And then finally, take a look at how we are evaluating in the programmatic review. But I can't think of a reason why an existing provider would be disadvantaged.
And
Yeah,
in
so-
addition, sorry.
So
go
no, I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I think actually kind of the opposite and existing. So if you have experience, and this gets back to like the technical capabilities, and you've already been doing this, I would say showcase that. But getting kind of reemphasizing what Sarah Blue said, I would look at it as a matter of capabilities, capacities, and outcomes. So if we borrow the phrase from network television, the more you know, if you can show us the more that you know, and again, whether it's letters of interest or intent or others from last mile providers, if you can show, hey, this is where the underserved and unserved are, these are the things we're going to do, this is the competitive and or cooperative landscape. What we don't want to have is we don't want to have networks that are where entities don't know how to run them and operate them and be sustainable. So I would say play to your strengths.
Yeah, I mean, the experience, like Mike said, that experience is so critical with this review. We're getting a lot of help from our other federal agencies, our brothers and sisters, on lessons learned in the past. And it's really critical. $1 billion for middle mile sounds like a lot of money. We all know that it's really not. We've got to spend this money wisely. And so a big part of that in the reviews is going to be this looking at your experience managing this kind of a network before.
In regards to the application score, can you tell us if partnerships are necessary or if they will score better?
I don't think we can comment on whether or not they will score better. We are definitely encouraging partnerships largely because we believe that this program is going to be oversubscribed and there's nobody who can do everything. I mean, think about the experience that you have, think about supply chain, how you're going to address getting all these, maybe there's somebody that you can partner with who's got, for example, while this is a technology neutral or agnostic program, maybe somebody's got fiber coiled up somewhere that they can give you. It's going to take a lot of partners to build out this network. So, and at the end of the day, once we make the recommendations on the type of on those awards, the assistant secretary's got the right to go through that list one last time, and for geographic reasons or size of award reasons, take maybe somebody, maybe there's another application. So a partnership is not necessarily better or worse, but we're definitely encouraging it because I think that's the best way that we solve this problem.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So let's talk open access. So to what extent is open access needed, encouraged, or required?
That's a really good question. And I'd go take a look at the merit review scoring. Like the only way that you get 100 points when you read the merit scoring process, we're going to have 3 merit reviewers who will independently take a look, and it's pretty explicit how many points they can allocate for each portion. And only those applications that score an average of 80 or greater, 80 out of 100 or greater, and meet 2 of the 5 statutory criteria, those applications are the ones who will be prioritized for programmatic review. Open access is worth 10 points. So if you're not offering open access, then you're beginning with best case a 90. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to understand how you're going to be scored or evaluated in the merit, and think about that when you submit your application.
We also have a question here that was also asked on the last webinar, so we hope to address it today. But if a new entity that was formed in 2022, how would they attain the 3-year financial requirement?
It is a requirement that that we have. I know that there's two different places in the NOFO where we talk about financials, we talk about audited, and we talk about historical. It is a requirement that that financials are being provided with the application. And we're looking for experience. So it is an essential. Mike, do you have anything to add on or Ming on the financials?
Yeah, I guess I would add, so the experience is definitely part of it. It is the, have you been sustaining? If you've been losing money hand over fist, we might question some of the business practices, but again, show us the evidence on that. As far as if there's something new, if it's a combination, we'll probably have to work on a use case for this, but if it's a combination of existing entities that is forming something new, I'm sure we can come up with a way that we can document that.
Great.
Anything else to add?
No, I don't have any additional to add to that question.
Okay. I think we can move on to the next question here. Does the middle mile have to connect anchor institutions within 1,000 feet or just identify them?
That's a really good question. And by the way, I see that there is another question in the chat about somebody who was only able to join late and was wondering if we were typing up the Q&A. We are going to, this whole session, including the Q&A, is being recorded, and we're going to post it to our website in a couple of days, within a week. And Sarah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we used to do transcripts. I think, are we still doing transcripts of the material so that somebody can read through?
I don't think for this webinar. We will just have the PowerPoint and the recording available.
And you can, and then we're also taking all the questions out of the Q&A and submitting those to the FAQ check. So do keep an eye, please, on the FAQs. Sorry, and I just interrupted myself again. So can you please repeat that one more time?
So we were discussing does the middle mile have to connect anchor institutions within 1,000 feet or just identify them?
The requirement is that if the technology being proposed in the project is fiber optic, then you do have to indicate those CAIs which are within 1,000 feet, and you have to facilitate the facility. So you are not actually.
The facility must facilitate.
Yes, yes, yes.
You're welcome for the facilitation.
You go ahead, Mike.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
You will actually, you will not be funded to connect to the community anchor institution, but you will be required to make it possible that that community anchor institution could be reached within with gig up and down speeds.
All right.
Yeah, I would say back to capability and ability. So if it's fiber, have the capability, have the ability. If you were offering Sarah or I something and we refuse, you can't make us connect, but the offer has to be.
So we are now close to time, and I'd like to give Ming, Mike, and Sarah a minute or two, if they would like, to share with viewers if there was one thing to walk away with from this webinar or one piece of advice as applicants are working through their applications. So let's start with Ming.
Thank you for all the participants that joining this webinar. I think this webinar definitely is helpful for the applicants how to put together a good application. I know Mike, mentioned in the presentation, and also Sarah mentioned a couple of times about what the applicant needs to pay attention to is the NOFO. The NOFO's notice of funding opportunity describes the program and the requirements and the application requirements for to put together a good application. So read through the NOFO very carefully, make sure that, you submit all the documents required in the NOFO and follow all the requirements. And that's the first advice I would provide. Thank you.
Hey, Ming, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
If somebody's got a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, is there a de minimis amount so they would not be required to upload that agreement? Is there a de minimis indirect rate amount that can be used instead?
Yes, generally, if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, and if you are including that into your proposed budget, then you are required to provide a copy of the negotiated rate agreement. If you don't have a negotiated rate agreement, in accordance with the 2 CFR 200, for applicants that do not have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, including a provisional rate, you may elect to charge indirect costs to the award pursuant to the de minimis rate of 10% of the modified total direct costs. Just to note that the cost must be consistently charged either direct or indirect, cannot be double charged inconsistently as both. So you are, if you don't have a current negotiated indirect cost rate, you are eligible for a 10% direct cost de minimis rate to charge to the award.
Thank you, Ming.
All right, thank you, Ming. I'll pass it over to Mike now.
Oh, put me on the spot. Okay, so I'm going to echo what Ming said. Read the NOFO. Also, a couple of things that I mentioned before, and to appease Sarah, remember the end of September, because that's when everything is due. And again, the portal is mean, and I am not. Remember, I'm friendly and nice. The portal is mean, but we have rules. We have to obey the rules. In all seriousness, when going through the application, I would go into the portal first, kind of do a pre-read, make sure that you understand everything. Please, and thank you again for everybody who's asking questions today. Please keep asking the questions. I'll be compiling, with the help of family and friends, the FAQs that are going on and working through the nuances of some of the things that we could not completely answer today. So please keep the questions coming. But as far as, again, I would look at capabilities, capacities, and outcomes, and play to your strengths. So be thorough, but be concise. And I'll leave it there.
Sarah, do you have some final parting comments?
I think I have worked myself out of a job with Mike's brilliant presenting capabilities. Thank you, Mike, and Sarah's wonderful moderating abilities. Thank you. I've been talking and taking a lot of questions, and I see I'm having the brain farts today because for the first time I'm actually working through the questions on the back end, and so my brain is not 100% here. Sorry, I say all of that because there are a couple of questions that are here. Like, for example, there's one about CMC and whether or not those funds can be used. And CMC is not a middle mile deployment project. So those funds are not being used, and you can't use any other federal funds to be match in our middle mile program. There was another question that we had about match. It is required 30% match. And when you read through the merit, you're going to see that you can get additional merit score points if you match more than 50%. So take a look at that. And sorry, I'm just kind of running through here because there are a ton of questions, and I know some of these questions are here because we haven't been able to ask them, or we haven't been able to answer them yet. Don't give up on us. Your questions are really important to us. We're trying to answer these as quickly as we can. There are a lot of approvals that we have to go through in order to make sure that we can publish that, but please don't give up on us. There are a lot of questions here about labor, the labor narrative, the workforce development narrative, civil rights compliance. You are limited in your response. We don't need the 100-page document. Give us the details of what practices you have in place today, what you're doing to make sure that you've got fair labor, that you're in compliance with civil laws. So that's really the best advice that I can give you. I'll also highlight that in 2 weeks, we're going to do a webinar on NEPA and climate resiliency and historical preservation. Those are big topics. The person who asked earlier today about that it might take 2 years for permitting, that's a real situation. And NEPA is also a big part. We're doing what we can on our end to work with other agencies to try to make that a better situation, but build these things into your timeline. Come join us on the webinar in 2 weeks to learn about NEPA, to learn about what we're looking for with climate resiliency. There's a lot. We're looking for your thoughts in how you're solving for how you're addressing the fact that you might be in a flood zone or you might be in a hurricane zone. So why did you choose this particular technology or whatever the case? So that's a lot. And I know that I'm kind of all over the place and I apologize, but I wanted to try to answer some of the questions that have been out there and just repeat again, keep sending us in your really good questions. They're getting harder to answer because they're more specific, but I know that they're just as important as anything else. So don't give up on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Those were all very important points. So before we close out, I'd like to thank Mike, Sarah, and Ming for taking the time to present and answer questions today. I would also like to thank potential applicants for tuning into today's webinar. We are very, very excited and looking forward to working with as many of you in the future again to attain the goal of bringing affordable and reliable high-speed internet to everyone in America. For those that joined us late or would like to replay this webinar again, it will be posted to our website. I think Ryan just dropped the link in the chat. And so also on the website, you may register for our upcoming webinars. We'll be discussing NEPA, historical preservation, and climate resiliency on July 27th. And we will be covering the financial portion of the Middle Mile grant application on August 10th. So please keep an eye out for those. We did receive so many questions today that could not be addressed, but we always encourage you to please continue to send us your questions to middlemile@ntia.gov. Continue to check out our website. I believe we'll be coming out with a third version of our frequently asked questions, so please keep an eye out for that. And we will talk with you all soon. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and I hope you all have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.